The boardroom was silent, not the quiet of concentration, the silence of a trap about to spring. The CEO was midway through denying everything when the janitor's 6-year-old daughter, who shouldn't have even been in the building, tugged on his pant leg and looked up. What she said next, just 3 words, would dismantle a $250 million lie and expose a theft that stole from the poorest families in the state. This was the moment a 2-year facade crumbled. The CEO was Ethan Croft, and his company, Oragard, was at the center of Minnesota's largest ever welfare fraud scandal. Millions in taxpayer dollars, meant for childcare for the working poor, had vanished into shell companies and fake daycare centers. Federal investigators were circling, but Croft had an answer for every question. His defense was airtight, until the one witness no protocol could account for walked in. How does a 6-year-old see a truth that auditors, attorneys, and a grand jury could not? To understand how a child's words could hold such power, you first have to understand the 2 worlds that collided that day. On one side, Ethan Croft, founder and CEO of Oragard, a corporate consulting firm that had, almost overnight, become the primary administrator for Minnesota's Child Care Assistance Program. The contract was worth $89 million a year. Croft was 47, a man who had cultivated an image of philanthropic innovation. He lived in a glass and steel penthouse overlooking the city, gave TEDx talks on public-private partnership, and his social media was a curated gallery of handshakes with politicians and visits to the very daycare centers his company was supposed to be funding. He was charming, articulate, and by all public accounts, a visionary. On the other side, there was Mara Segovia. She was 32, and she cleaned offices for a living. The Oragard headquarters was one of her 5 nightly stops. Her shift there started at 8 p.m. after the last executives had left and ended at midnight. She worked alone, pushing a cart with supplies through the silent, polished hallways. She vacuumed the carpets that cost more than her annual rent, wiped down the glass walls of the corner offices, and emptied the trash bins of coffee cups and discarded brainstorm notes. She was thorough, quiet, and invisible, the kind of person the powerful look right through. She had been doing this for 6 years. She brought her daughter, Chloe, to work because her babysitter, her sister, had moved out of state 3 months prior, and Mara could not afford to miss a single shift. So she did what single mothers do. She figured it out. She would settle Chloe on a blanket in a spare, windowless conference room with a tablet and a bag of crackers, with strict instructions not to wander. It was against policy, but the night security guard, a man named Ray who had grandchildren of his own, pretended not to see. For 2 years, this was the rhythm. Mara cleaned, Croft built his empire, and between them, a river of public money flowed. The Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP, was a lifeline for low-income parents, covering the cost of daycare so they could work or go to school. In Minnesota, the need was desperate. Wait lists were thousands of names long, and Oragard's job was to process the payments, vet the providers, and ensure the money went where it was supposed to go. But by 2024, state auditors started noticing anomalies. Payments were going to daycare centers with addresses that turned out to be empty lots or strip mall storefronts. Some centers showed more children enrolled than their physical space could possibly hold. One provider claimed to be caring for infants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The red flags were piling up, but Oragard's reports back to the state were flawless. Green lights across the board. Croft had an answer for everything. A sophisticated fraud detection algorithm, he claimed, rigorous on-site inspections. He presented charts and data that showed unprecedented efficiency. He blamed any discrepancies on overwhelmed state systems, on clerical errors at the county level. He was so convincing that when a state legislator first raised concerns in a committee hearing, she was publicly chastised for undermining a successful public-private partnership. Croft's facade was a fortress. And behind that fortress, according to later federal indictments, the truth was a hydra of shell companies. Oragard would approve a fake daycare for funds. That fake daycare was owned by a limited liability company, which was owned by another LLC, often registered in another state. The money would be paid out, then swiftly moved through a series of accounts, a portion skimmed off at each step, before finally landing in accounts controlled by Croft and a small circle of associates. They allegedly stole not just from the state, but from the pockets of parents who couldn't afford diapers. The total would eventually be estimated at $250 million. Mara knew none of this. She knew the trash she emptied. In Croft's office, she saw the empty bottles of expensive bourbon, the drafts of angry emails to subordinates printed out and then crumpled, the receipts for $5,000 dinners. She saw the stress, the performative intensity. She heard him on the phone once late when he thought he was alone, his voice a low, furious snarl. Just make it go away. She cleaned around it. It was not her business. Her business was the $680 a week she earned after taxes. Her business was the one-bedroom apartment that smelled of damp carpet, where she let Chloe have the bedroom and she slept on the sofa. Her business was the constant, precise math of survival. The margin was 6 minutes. That's how much buffer time she had between finishing at Oregard and starting her next job cleaning a gym at 1 a.m. if she hit a red light. The whole delicate structure trembled. Chloe was 6. She had her mother's dark, observant eyes and a stillness that was unusual for a child. She didn't mind the quiet of the empty office building. She'd wander the halls sometimes, just outside the circle of Mara's vacuum's noise, her small hand trailing along the cool glass walls. She knew the rules. Don't touch the desks. Don't go into the offices with the lights on. One night she found a stuffed company mascot, a blue owl that had fallen behind a couch in the lobby. She brought it back to her conference room blanket and named it Hoot. Mara let her keep it. It was the first toy Chloe had that was new, not from a thrift store bag. The pressure on Croft was building, though Mara couldn't see it. The federal investigation, dubbed Operation Paper Owl, was closing in. Subpoenas had been issued. His top lieutenant, a CFO named David Pierce, had been questioned by the FBI and was reportedly cooperating. The board of directors was getting nervous. Croft's response was to double down. He called an all-hands meeting for a Thursday evening, a mandatory show of unity. He would address the team, present new exonerating data, and project unshakable confidence. The meeting was set for 7 p.m. Mara's shift started at 8, but that Thursday her car wouldn't start. A dead battery. By the time roadside assistance came, by the time she got a jump, by the time she dropped Chloe with Ray the security guard with a rushed plea to watch her for just 20 minutes, it was 7:45. The all-hands meeting was still going. The entire staff was packed into the main atrium, and Mara had to start her clean. She pushed her cart silently into the back of the atrium, a shadow in the service doorway, hopping to gather trash from the periphery once the meeting ended. She saw Croft on the small stage under lights. His voice was booming, defiant. What we are seeing is not a scandal, but a smear campaign. Our work is changing lives. The employees listened, some nodding, others with faces blank with doubt. Chloe, bored in the security office, had slipped away from Ray. She followed the sound of the crowd, the light. She found her mother, a silent figure in the dark doorway, and slipped her hand into Mara's. Together, unseen, they watched. Croft was in the middle of a sentence, pointing to a graph on a screen behind him. The data is clear and it is irrefutable. Not a single dollar is unaccounted for. And that's when Chloe, looking not at the graph but at the man, squeezed her mother's hand and said, in a voice that was not quite a whisper, clear and bright as a bell in the sudden quiet between his sentences, "Mommy, he's lying." The words didn't echo. They were absorbed by the thick carpet and the stunned silence of 100 adults. Croft's eyes flickered toward the dark doorway. He saw a woman in a janitor's uniform. He saw a small child holding a blue stuffed owl. His face, for one fraction of a second, went perfectly, terrifyingly blank. The mask vanished. And in that raw, unguarded moment, everyone in that room saw not a visionary, but a man caught. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The air in the atrium had turned to glass. Then Ethan Croft blinked and the CEO was back. A thin, cold smile appeared on his face. He gestured vaguely toward the doorway. And even the children, he said, his voice artificially warm, are captivated by the story our detractors are spinning. He tried to laugh. It was a dry, brittle sound that died in the silent room. He moved on, talking faster now, but the spell was broken. The graph on the screen behind him no longer looked like data. It looked like a prop. Mara, her heart hammering against her ribs, pulled Chloe back into the dark hallway. "We have to go, now." She abandoned her cart. She didn't clock out. She took her daughter's hand and practically ran for the service elevator. In the car, Chloe was quiet. "Is the man in trouble?" she finally asked. Mara looked at her daughter's face in the rearview mirror. "Why did you say that, baby? Why did you say he was lying?" Chloe shrugged, hugging the blue owl. His face was like Uncle Rob's. Uncle Rob was Mara's ex-brother-in-law, who had once tried to sell them a used car he claimed was like new when the engine was clearly smoking. Chloe, even at 4, had pointed at the smoke and said, "It's sick." She had a preternatural sensitivity to incongruity, to the gap between what was said and what was true. Mara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The next morning, the story was not on the news, but it was everywhere inside Beauregard. It moved through the building not as an email, but as a rumor, a secret passed in hushed tones by the coffee machines. "Did you hear what happened last night?" The janitor's kid called him a liar to his face. Croft looked like he'd seen a ghost. By 10 a.m., Mara received a call from the building management company that contracted her services. Her supervisor, a woman named Brenda, sounded strained. "Mara, we're getting complaints about a child causing a disruption in a client's sensitive all-staff meeting. You know, bringing her was against policy." Mara apologized, her mouth dry. "It won't happen again." "It can't," Brenda said. "They're requesting a different cleaning crew for the Beauregard account, effective immediately." Just like that, her largest, most reliable source of income was gone. The math of her life, already precarious, now had a $680 a week hole in it. She called in favors, picked up an extra shift cleaning a school, and felt the walls of her world contracting. She assumed that was the end of it. A rich man's bruised ego, a poor woman's consequence. She was wrong. It was the beginning. Because in the audience that night was a young financial analyst named Anya Desai. Anya had been at Beauregard for 18 months, and for the last 6, a quiet, persistent doubt had been growing in her mind. She was part of the team that prepared the exonerating data for the state. She had been asked to pull certain numbers, exclude certain outliers, use specific accounting methodologies that felt less like innovation and more like obfuscation. She had seen payments approved for daycare centers with websites that were just template placeholders. She had asked her direct manager a careful question and been told, in no uncertain terms, to stick to her lane. The child's voice, cutting through Croft's performance, was the catalyst. It shattered her rationalization that she was just doing her job. The emperor had no clothes, and a 6-year-old had just said so aloud. Anya went home that night and couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, she logged into her work drive from her personal laptop and began downloading spreadsheets, payment approval logs, internal memos. She took screenshots of Slack channels where managers used vague, coded language about special projects and Client P. She compiled everything into a folder, encrypted it, and the next day, she called the tip line for the FBI agent whose name had been on the subpoenas served to the company. She became confidential source number 9. The federal investigation, which had been building a complex paper trail, now had a living, breathing guide. Anya's information provided the map to the maze. It showed which anomalies were not errors, but features. It connected the offshore accounts to the approval signatures, and it gave the prosecutors a critical piece: intent. They could now prove Croft and his inner circle knew the daycares were fake. But the law moves slowly. The public story moved fast. 3 days after the Atrium incident, an anonymous post appeared on a local journalism forum. The title was, "What Did the Janitor's Kid Know?" It recounted the event in stark detail, naming Croft and Beauregard. It asked the question that was now ticking like a bomb in the minds of every employee who had been there. Why did a billionaire CEO look so terrified by a toddler's 3-word observation? The post went viral in Minnesota political circles. From there, it was picked up by an investigative reporter at the Star Tribune. Her name was Simone Clark. Simone had been sniffing around the edges of the childcare fraud story for months, blocked at every turn by Beauregard's aggressive public relations team and a lack of whistleblowers. This was her way in. She didn't care about the child's statement as evidence. She cared about it as a symbol. It was the perfect narrative wedge. She published a story that connected the dots: the mysterious anonymous post, the confirmed federal investigation into Beauregard, the long-standing complaints from legitimate daycare providers about fake competitors sucking up funds. The headline read, "A child's accusation in a boardroom echoes a state's doubts." For the first time, the scandal had a human face, and it wasn't Croft's. It was, indirectly, Chloe's. The media storm descended. Croft went from visionary to villain in a news cycle. Cameras camped outside the Beauregard Tower. The board of directors, smelling liability, held an emergency meeting. They publicly voted full confidence in Croft, but privately they hired their own forensic auditing firm. The pressure was no longer external, it was in the house. Mara, meanwhile, was trapped in a different kind of storm. With her name now whispered in connection with the story, the janitor, she found herself unhireable. Other cleaning companies didn't want the drama. She sold her car to pay rent. She and Chloe moved into a room in a friend's apartment. The stuffed blue owl hoot was now a treasured artifact in a life that felt upended. Chloe started having nightmares. She would wake up crying, saying, "The angry man is at the door." Mara would hold her, assuring her they were safe, while she herself stared at the locked door, listening to every sound in the hallway. Then the envelope arrived. It had no return address. It was slipped under the door of her friend's apartment. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality paper. On it, typed in a plain font, was a message: "A court can compel a child to be evaluated by a forensic psychologist to determine if they are suggestible, if they can distinguish fantasy from reality. These evaluations are lengthy and intrusive." It was signed, "A friend concerned for your well-being." It wasn't a threat, it was worse. It was a prediction, a blueprint for how Ethan Croft's legal team could dismantle her daughter's credibility before she even took a stand. They wouldn't attack the child. They would pathologize her imagination. They would turn her innocence into a liability. Mara had never felt so powerless. She was in a battle against a fortune that could hire experts who would write reports with phrases like false memory implantation and parental influence. How do you prove a child saw the truth? The law she was learning is not about truth, it's about what you can prove, and the science, as she would soon discover, was on Croft's side. Studies show adults, even professionals, correctly identify when a child is lying only 54% of the time, barely better than a coin flip. A child's word is fragile. It can be bent, shaped, and broken by the very process meant to protect it. Mara made a decision. She couldn't fight this with a lawyer she couldn't afford, but she could find someone who understood the weapon being forged. She looked up the name of the reporter, Simone Clark. She called the main line at the Star Tribune. "My name is Mara Segovia," she said, her voice shaking only a little. "I'm the janitor, and we need to talk." Simone Clark met Mara at a public library in a corner far from the security cameras. The reporter bought 2 coffees from the vending machine and listened, her notebook untouched, as Mara spoke in a low, steady voice. She told her about the cleaning, about Chloe, about the silence in the atrium, and about the typed notes slipped under the door. Simone's expression, initially professional and curious, hardened into something grim. "They're laying the groundwork," she said. "It's a classic strategy. If this ever goes to trial and a child witness is involved, the defense will try to get a forensic interview ordered. Their expert will look for any inconsistency, any hint that Chloe might have been coached or is confusing a story she heard with something she saw." She looked at Mara. "You can't let them near her, not without an advocate." Simone became that advocate. She connected Mara with a non-profit legal group that specialized in protecting vulnerable witnesses. She also began publishing. Her next story wasn't about the fraud's mechanics. It was titled, "The Cost of Truth: How the System Prepares to Doubt a Child." It detailed the psychological tactics used to discredit young witnesses, citing the very studies Mara had found, the 54% accuracy rate, the suggestibility of children. She didn't name Chloe, but the context was unmistakable. The public reaction was a wave of outrage. Donations poured into the legal nonprofit. For the first time, Mara felt a flicker of protection. In the shadows, the countermove was already in play. Ethan Croft's legal team, a formidable white-collar defense firm, filed a motion in the parallel civil case brought by the state. They argued that the media spectacle and the unverified sensational anecdote of a minor's outburst had irreparably poisoned the jury pool. They requested the entire case be dismissed due to prosecutorial misconduct, claiming the government had leaked the story to the press. It was a bold, aggressive deflection. The motion included a footnote. It mentioned, almost in passing, that third-party actors with a financial interest in the state's case may have coached the minor for dramatic effect. They were drawing a target on Mara's back, implying she had put her daughter up to it for a future payday. The story split into 2 parallel, brutal tracks. In the marble halls of the federal courthouse, attorneys argued about motions and evidence. In the court of public opinion, fought on social media and cable news, a vicious narrative was spun by commentators sympathetic to Croft. They painted Mara as a schemer, a single mother who saw a payday. They asked why a child was in a corporate boardroom at night. They dissected every interview Mara had given, looking for contradictions. The message was clear. The real victim here was the innovative businessman being harassed by a greedy cleaner and her manipulated child. The psychological toll was immediate. Chloe's nightmares worsened. She stopped talking about the angry man and started having panic attacks at the sound of a doorbell. Mara took her to a child therapist paid for by the legal fund. The therapist's diagnosis was acute anxiety. Her recommended treatment was stability and safety, two things Mara could not provide. They were living in borrowed space, their lives suspended. Mara's friends, initially supportive, began to distance themselves. The pressure was too much. The phone calls from unknown numbers, the strange cars that seemed to idle outside. It was easier to fade away than to stand next to a lightning rod. Then Simone called with new information. Her source within the federal investigation, Anya Desai, though Simone protected her identity, had delivered something startling. It wasn't about the money, it was about the human cost. The fraud hadn't just stolen from the state, it had directly defrauded families. Beauregard, the investigation found, had systematically denied legitimate reimbursement claims from real daycare centers serving low-income neighborhoods. They created algorithmic barriers, lost paperwork, endless appeals processes. Why? Because every dollar they didn't pay out to a real provider was a dollar they could funnel to a fake one. Simone had gotten her hands on an internal memo. The subject line was Client P maximization. In corporate jargon, it outlined a policy of strategic claim deferral in zip codes with high provider density and low political advocacy. They were targeting the poor, the undocumented, the people least likely to have the resources to fight back. The memo was signed by David Pierce, the cooperating CFO. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. The fraud wasn't a victimless financial crime. It had stolen slots in safe, licensed daycare centers from thousands of real children. It had forced parents to quit their jobs or leave their kids in unsafe conditions. The story transformed from a boardroom drama into a profound social betrayal. Simone published the memo with redactions. The outcry was seismic. The pressure finally cracked the dam inside Beauregard. Other employees, seeing the memo, started coming forward, not just to the FBI, but to the press. An accounts payable clerk described being ordered to shred boxes of claim forms from certain centers. A customer service rep recounted a script they were given to deflect and delay angry providers. The inner circle around Croft, which had been airtight, began to leak. The board of directors' private forensic audit concluded that material financial malfeasance was not only possible but likely. They voted to suspend Croft, with pay pending the outcome of the investigations. It was a coward's move, but it was a fracture. His fortress had a breach. But Croft was not finished. He was a man who had spent a lifetime bending reality to his will. His final move was not legal but personal. He granted an exclusive interview to a major television network. He sat in what was described as his home library, a room of leather and old books, and presented himself not as a CEO, but as a father. He spoke about the pain of being publicly accused. He talked about his own children, how they were being bullied at school. He never mentioned Mara or Chloe by name, but he spoke about the power of a careless story to ruin lives. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes glistening with what appeared to be unshed tears. "I may have made business mistakes," he said, his voice trembling with practiced emotion, "but I am not the monster they are painting me to be. This has become a witch hunt, and the loudest voice in the mob is the one we are not allowed to question." It was a masterclass in reversal. He was framing himself as the true victim of a conspiracy, with Mara and the media as the persecutors. The interview aired on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, the narrative had shifted again. A segment of the public, weary of complex fraud stories and susceptible to a charismatic man's pain, began to question. Online, the attacks on Mara intensified. Now she wasn't just greedy, she was a pawn in a political hit job. The legal nonprofit warned her. Croft's strategy was to make any trial about asterisk her credibility, and by extension, Chloe. If he could muddy the waters enough, a jury might believe there was reasonable doubt about everything, even the stolen millions. Mara reached her breaking point in a grocery store aisle. She saw her own face on the cover of a tabloid at the checkout, next to the headline "Welfare Queen" or "Whistleblower." She left her cart full of food and walked out empty-handed. She couldn't do this anymore. The truth, it seemed, was not a shield. It was a target. She called Simon, ready to say she was dropping everything, that she would disappear. But Simon answered the phone with one sentence, her voice electric with urgency. "Don't say a word, don't talk to anyone. They just arrested him." Ethan Croft was arrested at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, of course, by agents from the FBI and the Inspector General's office. They took him from his penthouse in handcuffs, the images captured by news helicopters and broadcast live. He was charged with 12 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit federal program theft. The indictment was 37 pages long. It detailed the shell companies, the fake daycare centers, and the systematic denial of legitimate claims. It did not mention a child's 3 words. It didn't have to. The fortress was now a crime scene. The arrest was not the end. It was the beginning of a long, meticulous process designed to avoid the very spectacle Croft had warned about. The federal prosecutors, armed with the mountain of evidence from Anya Desai and the other whistleblowers, offered Croft a deal. In exchange for a guilty plea on all counts and his full cooperation in recovering the stolen funds, they would recommend a sentence at the lower end of the guidelines. They wanted the money back more than they wanted a circus. Croft, after 2 weeks of negotiation, took the deal. There would be no trial, no witness stand for Chloe, no forensic psychologist hired to pick apart her memory. The battle, in the end, was decided by paper, not people. At the sentencing hearing, Mara was allowed to give a victim impact statement. She did not speak about the night in the atrium. She spoke about the aftermath, about the panic attacks, the lost job, the fear that had seeped into their lives. She spoke about the thousands of families who had been denied childcare because of his greed. She looked at Croft, who sat slumped in a suit that now seemed too big for him, and said, "You didn't just steal money, you stole peace, you stole safety. And you tried to steal my daughter's voice, but you failed." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened without expression. Then she sentenced Ethan Croft to 14 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay $215 million in restitution. The money would be a fraction of what was stolen, but it was a start. The story, however, had a second act of justice. The public outrage and the detailed evidence spurred the state legislature to act. They passed Chloe's Law, a bipartisan bill that overhauled the child care assistance program. It mandated transparent payment tracking, created an independent inspector general for all state contracts, and established a whistleblower protection fund. The law was signed in a ceremony at a legitimate, struggling daycare center in North Minneapolis. Mara and Chloe were invited. Chloe, now 7, held her blue owl and watched the governor sign the papers. She didn't fully understand, but she knew it was a good day. A photographer captured a moment, Mara looking down at her daughter, her hand on Chloe's shoulder, her face a map of exhaustion and hard-won relief. It ran on the front page. This time, the caption read, "A mother's truth, a state's response." Life did not return to normal, because the old normal was gone. Mara used a portion of the whistleblower reward money she received from the state, a settlement from a separate civil suit, to buy a small, tidy house in a quieter neighborhood. She went back to school, studying to become a paralegal with a focus on consumer protection. The nightmares for Chloe slowly faded. The blue owl hoot sat on a shelf in her new, sun-filled bedroom, a relic of a war she was too young to remember fighting. They planted a garden in the backyard, simple things, marigolds and tomatoes. The final, surprising detail emerged a year after the sentencing. During the asset forfeiture process, the government seized everything Croft owned: his penthouse, his cars, his art collection. Among the items auctioned off was a corporate art collection from the Oregon headquarters. The pieces were sold to pay restitution. Simon Clark, the reporter, attended the auction out of professional curiosity. Lot number 117 was a small, unremarkable abstract painting that had hung in a hallway near the atrium. The bidding was low. Simone bought it for $250. She didn't want it for herself. A week later, she presented it to Mara and Chloe. "I thought you should have something from that building," she said, "something that doesn't belong to him anymore." They hung it in their new living room. It was just a painting. But to them, it was a flag planted on a battlefield, a quiet symbol that the silence had been broken and the light had won. The garden grew. Chloe started second grade. Mara finished her first semester with straight A's, and in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, Ethan Croft, inmate number 78341, began serving his time. The story doesn't end with a perfect bow. Real ones never do. But in a small house with a new garden, with a painting on the wall and a blue owl on a shelf, it felt, finally, like something beginning. A life rebuilt not on the silence of fear, but on the foundation of 3 simple, fearless words. So what is the weight of a child's truth? In a court of law, it is a fragile thing to be examined and questioned. In the human heart, it is an avalanche. Chloe Segovia did not understand why a fraud or shell companies. She understood a face that did not match the words coming out of it. She saw the crack in the mask, and with the fearless clarity of someone who has not yet learned to look away, she pointed. This story is about more than one lie exposed. It's about the systems we build that are too complex to see the simple truth at their center. It's about who we choose to believe and who we are conditioned to ignore. For 2 years, auditors with spreadsheets couldn't stop the theft. Lawyers with subpoenas couldn't stop it. A board of directors with fiduciary duty couldn't stop it. It took a 6-year-old in mismatched socks, holding a stuffed owl, to speak the 3 words that became a tipping point. "Mommy, he's lying." It reminds us that the most powerful force in the world is not money, or influence, or a perfectly crafted narrative. It is a single, unvarnished observation that lands at the exact right moment to change the trajectory of everything. We build fortresses of data and deception, but we are all vulnerable to the honest gaze of someone who has nothing to gain and everything to lose by telling the truth. Chloe's law now protects thousands of families. The restitution, though incomplete, is flowing back. A man sits in a cell. A mother and daughter have a garden. These are the measurable outcomes. But the immeasurable one is the question this story leaves with every one of us. What are the lies we have learned to live with? What are the injustices we walk past every day because they are complicated or because speaking up seems too costly? And who are the unlikely truth-tellers in our own lives? The quiet ones, the unseen, whose simple clarity could change everything if we only had the courage to listen. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that no one is too small to make a difference, then this channel is for you. We tell these stories because they matter. Because in a world shouting at you to look one way, we ask you to look another. To see the janitor, the child, the quiet observer. To remember that the biggest battles often start with the smallest voice. If you believe in stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Become part of a community that values depth over noise. Leave a comment below. Tell us about a time someone's honesty, especially a child's, surprised you or changed your perspective. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters. We don't shout here, we don't chase trends. We listen for the stories that are worth staying for, the ones that speak in a whisper but echo for a lifetime. And there are so many more worth staying for. Thanks for watching.